Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So yesterday we left off with all of our side rail pieces all fully sanded up to 220 grit. Now what we have to do is go through, drill all of our holes that we're going to use for dowels. Then once we have all of our dowel holes drilled, we can then glue this thing up so that we're dealing with one solid object rather than a whole bunch of different small pieces. So I've gone through, I've made sure that everything is sitting nice and square. I've clamped them up with the pipe clamps under a lot of pressure. These pipe clamps really aren't twisting anymore. They are locked in as tight as they possibly can, which means that our joints are pulled together as tight as they possibly can go. Now again, like I said, it's really important to go through here and make sure that everything is square. Because when you do your glue up, as soon as you put in these dowels, that's going to lock that piece in that spot. So you want to make sure that when you're drilling these dowel holes, you're drilling them as accurately as possible. And this is your opportunity to make sure that everything is nice and square. This is the one major benefit to using dowels during a glue up. If you put your pieces in place when you have the glue on them, there's no guarantee they're going to be perfectly aligned. So by using the dowels, you know that as soon as you insert that dowel into those holes, it's going to pull this inner piece wherever it needs to be perfectly in line with wherever you decided you wanted it to be. So that's just one of those things that I find really helpful about traditional mortise and tenon joinery like this, is that you can use stuff like draw boring or just dowels in general to help really guide your joints to the perfect alignment during the glue up. Overall, it makes any glue up you do a lot less stressful because you know for a fact that as soon as you put that dowel in place, that piece is going to get pulled into the proper position. Alright, so both of the side rails are all glued up. I use hide glue again on these side rails just that way in the future, if something gets damaged or broken, it's very easy to go back in and replace it. The only reason I can use hide glue in this assembly is because we're using a traditional form of joinery that is just naturally in and of itself very strong. When you use mortise and tenon joinery and then you pin it with a dowel, those joints are not going to come apart. So the glue is only there to just make sure that that pin can't come sliding out. I did put glue in the mortises just to make sure that the mortise and tenon part of the joint is actually holding together, but the main thing here is that as long as this pin can't come out easily, then this whole thing will stay together nicely. Then if something gets damaged in the future, all we have to do is just go through and steam all the joints and it should come apart with that little bit of heat and moisture. The other thing I started doing recently that I haven't really mentioned before, that I started putting glue on the bottom side of wherever I have floating panels. Because what I've noticed in the past is that if I have a panel that's fitted up really nicely, through expansion and contraction, in the summer right now it might be super tight, but then when it comes to the winter, the panel will loosen up a little bit and might start bouncing around. If you just put a bead of glue along the bottom edge where your panel is just naturally going to sit anyway, that'll hold the panel in place, and all you have to make sure of is you have enough room on the top side here for that full panel's expansion and contraction, because it'll be fixed on the bottom side and it'll expand upwards. So it was a very uneventful glue up, other than I almost killed myself trying to move the first one, and I'm probably going to do that again trying to move this one off the workbench. One of the big benefits to using hide glue is that you're not really limited by an open working time. Compared to like Type-On 3, which has I believe it's a 10-minute working time, I believe hide glue has a 10 to 20-minute working time on it. So overall, you just got a lot of time to, go through, make sure you're taking the time to tune up your joints, all that kind of stuff, while the glue is sitting in there. You're not rushing anything. But for now, we're going to set these rails to the side and get working on the headboard panels. Alright, so we now have all of our headboard panels flattened and sanded up to 80 grit, and that is all I'm going to be able to do today. My back hurts, my arms are numb, and I just want to take a nap. trying to get these panels done was that was about as much of a nightmare as I was expecting, and I just can't stand here and sand for any more today. So on the next day that we're working on this project, we'll come back in, we'll get these finished sanded up to 220 grit. It shouldn't take that long. The 80 grit sanding is by far the hardest, because the way that I went about flattening these panels is, as you guys saw, I started by trying to use the drum sander. That wasn't really working because the panels obviously had some twist to them. So then I went and flattened them with the router sled, which then introduced some pretty decent mill marks in that. So then I went back to the drum sander, which I completely forgot to take any footage of because I was exhausted at that point anyway. And then the drum sander puts all of these lines going across. And so I did that at 80 grit on the drum sander. So then doing the random orbital sander with the 80 grit, those two lines don't mix nicely. So the 80 grit lines from the drum sander going across the grain were super deep and took just way longer than necessary to get out. What I should have done is I should have swapped on a 150 belt onto the drum sander and done another whole pass on both sides of these panels, then come back and sanded it with 80 grit, because that would have helped clean things up a little bit more. But anyway, we're done. We're at 80 grit. We got no more of those long cross grain streaks and that in these panels. They're looking good. They just need to be finished sanded. But yeah, no, all jokes aside, I don't think I'll be doing any more solid maple furniture. If I ever get a customer asking for it, I will probably talk them out of it, or I'll just charge them exuberant amounts of money to convince them out of it. Because I think that's the one big lesson I'm learning from this, is that when I was charging for this project, I charged it the same way that I charged for the other bed frame. So I looked at my materials, I figured out how much time it would approximately take me, and I completely forgot that maple is very, very hard. So maple is generally a cheaper wood compared to white oak and walnut, but it's that density and just the challenge in milling it and doing everything with it
that you need to charge extra for. So that's something that I got to keep in mind. If I have any customers that are trying to convince me to do something in maple, I will make sure to add in like a maple fee or something, you know, just something, or I'll just jack up the price to a point that is actually reasonable, because right now I'm doing a lot more work than I was on the other bed for, well, actually, honestly, less money. But anyway, we're getting really close. At least today we were able to get those side rails glued up. I'm really happy about that. Those are looking really good. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.